But when political figures begin to suggest that free speech is a block to progress, it's time to take notice.
Welcome to the Undependent Podcast, where we empower self-reliance one step at a time. In today's episode, we're diving deep into a topic that affects everyone who values the right to free speech and independent thought. We're talking about the growing trend of political figures like John Kerry pushing agendas that seek to control what we say, how we think, and even the sources of information we choose to trust. Let me say this up front. This episode is not about conspiracies or extremism. This is about protecting your ability to make decisions for yourself, live independently, and think freely, which is more critical now more than ever. So let's get to it. So in segment 1, we're going to talk about John Kerry's remarks and their impact on free speech. Recently, during a World Economic Forum panel, John Kerry made a startling statement. He called the First Amendment a major block to combating misinformation, particularly about climate change. Now think about that. The First Amendment, which guarantees us the right to free speech, is being seen as an obstacle to governance. Now, why is that? It's because it allows you and me, the everyday individuals, to challenge the official narrative, to question what we're told, and to seek out different perspectives. This isn't about climate change. It's about control. When public figures argue for curbing free speech, they're saying, we know better than you, and we're going to decide what you can and cannot hear. And if you're listening to the Undependent Podcast, you know that's not what we're about. We believe in your ability to think critically, to seek out diverse information, and to make decisions without being spoon-fed by the government, big media, or anybody. Now, in segment 2 here, I'm going to talk about the sovereign individual. Now, when we hear sovereign, we usually think sovereign citizen. We start thinking about a lot of extremism. Follow me here. It's not about that. Being a sovereign individual is really about thinking on your own. It's about making decisions on your own terms. It's about understanding that the government is centralized and its authorities want to control every aspect of your life. It's breaking away from that. It's about owning your choices, being responsible for your well-being. And yes, that includes your right to think freely and speak your mind. In today's world, independent thought is under attack. Platforms that should allow open, speech are increasingly curbing viewpoints that don't fit a very narrow agenda. Whether you're talking about prepping, financial independence, gardening tips, the idea that you can live outside of the mainstream system can be seen as a threat. But here's the kicker. Sovereignty isn't about rebellion. It's about responsibility. It's about building a life where you are in control. Not because you're isolated, but because you've chosen to live deliberately. You decided what you want and you're going after it. It's not waiting for someone else to solve your problems for you. You're going to solve them on your own. Now, before we dive deeper into the dangers of censorship and political control, I want to share a quick word about a great resource for all of you self-reliant individuals out there. If you value your right to protect yourself and want to stay prepared, then check out Ammo Squared. Whether you're just starting to build your stash or you already have a solid stockpile of ammo, Ammo Squared helps you accumulate ammo on autopilot right from your phone or your computer. And the best part is if you sign up using my link at www.trb.fyi/A2, you get $20 worth of free ammo just for joining. It's that easy. It's a no-hassle way to stay ready for anything. Because like we always say here, personal responsibility and preparedness are key to living independent. So go to www.trb.fyi/A2 and get started. I did, and I absolutely love my account there. Now let's get back to it. Segment 3 here is about politics of censorship. This is the real threat to independence. John Kerry's remarks also brings up another critical issue: the growing influence of political agendas in controlling information. It's no secret that platforms like social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they're actively suppressing certain viewpoints under the banner of fighting misinformation. But who gets to decide what's information and misinformation? When public figures call for controls on free speech, they're suggesting that the few elites should determine what you're allowed to hear. Now, it's kind of funny how we talk about the elites here. John Kerry, all about climate change and global warming, all that stuff that, whatever their buzzword of the day is. He loves to fly around in a private jet that contributes to the thing he's supposed to be fighting. It's all about, do as I say, not as I do. And let's be clear, what we're talking about here is not fringe content. Channels like mine, the Rogue Banshee, and others that are promoting self-reliance, prepping, gun rights, we've been targeted for suppression, despite the fact that our content is legal and non-threatening. We're not promoting violence or conspiracy theories. We're promoting independence in thought, in skills, knowing what to do. What's wrong with that? What we're seeing is an intentional effort to shut down conservatives that challenge the mainstream. But the thing is, I'm not necessarily conservative, but it's so funny that they see me that way. I'm really an independent, libertarian, however you want to frame me. I can think on my own. I don't think inside this box, but yet they throw me in that box. And if they can make it harder for you to access the alternative viewpoints, then they can make it harder for you to think independently. And that's really where the real danger lies. Look at countries like China and Iran, where the government tightly controls speech. In China, dissenting voices are silenced. Internet access is heavily restricted, and people are jailed for speaking out against the regime. Iran similarly blocks social media and censors any form of criticism against the government or religion. The tight grip on information in these places is exactly what happens when free speech is eroded. You're left with a single approved narrative and no room for critical thinking or independent decision making. The irony here is that these countries, we strongly disagree with this, precisely because of their treatment of their citizens and their brutal suppression of dissent. Yet, we're starting to see the same arguments here at home, where political figures want to suppress speech in the name of misinformation, and they want to control that misinformation. Why would we ever want to mimic the methods of regimes that we openly oppose their human rights abuses? It's not just hypocritical, it's dangerous. We may not be there yet. But when political figures begin to suggest that free speech is a block to progress, it's time to take notice. Free speech enables progress. It allows us to open up debate. It allows us to discuss things. I don't have to agree with you. You don't have to agree with me. I mean, if we think about the founding of our country, there was huge debates on our founding documents. We need to protect our ability to think freely and speak freely before we find our societies where there's only state-approved speech allowed. Now, I know a lot of people throw this out. The book 1984, Big Brother is watching you. Big Brother controls your speech. They had Newspeak. I mean, there's such things in that book like you're not allowed to say quack. You're allowed to say duck speak. You can't say quack because quack has a negative connotation. But duck speak means quack, what a duck says. Does this sound familiar? Aren't they rewriting our language? Aren't they trying to control what we say, how we say it, where we say it? Think about that. It's scary that that book was written in the 1950s. This far along, we're now 70 years after that book was written? Boy, I mean, was that basically a blueprint for what we're not quite there, right? But aren't we getting there? I mean, if you think about certain things where, talk about Kamala Harris here for a second. We're not in any, none of our soldiers are in war zones. And then you get the videos of the soldiers in war zones going, well, then where are we? I mean, in that book, 1984, it's like, we're at war with East Asia. We were never at war. I mean, they just make stuff up. They're trying to control what you think. We need to be prepared for this. We need to be prepared for anything, not just our free speech. We need to be prepared for food shortage. I mean, we're getting ready to go into a dock worker strike. You want to be prepared. And speaking of being prepared, let me tell you about My Medic. You never know when you'll need first aid. Whether it's a minor cut or something more serious, My Medic offers top-notch first aid kits. They can be the difference between a minor incident and a real emergency. And right now, you can save 20% on your order by going to www.trb.fyi/mm. Use the checkout code TRB20. These kits are perfect for your home, car, go bag, range bag. Be ready for anything. Don't wait for an emergency to happen. My Medic is what I carry. It's in my car. It's on my range bags. I love My Medic. So head over to www.trb.fyi/mm and use the code TRB20 to save 20% and protect your self-reliance. Because let's face it, if you're not breathing, you can't be self-reliant. Now in segment 4, we're going to talk a little bit about historical context and the slippery slope of misinformation. Throughout history, when governments begin to suppress speech, it never ends well for the people. Just look at totalitarian regimes like the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany. Both tightly controlled what citizens could say, hear, and think. The result? Tyranny and oppression. This isn't some distant, far-off danger. It's exactly the kind of thing that the Founding Fathers designed the First Amendment to protect against. And what's so funny is they designed this way before the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. Because let's face it, we were dealing with that with England when we were just a colony. This is not new. This has been around forever. By allowing free speech to be curtailed in the name of progress or safety, we risk sliding down a path that leads to even more control. Once you start censoring one idea, it becomes easier to silence others. We say this about gun control, magazine limits. Okay, well, all right, you're allowed to have 8 rounds instead of 30. Where'd they come up with this magic 8? Well, now you have 5. You see how it works? They just slowly chip away. The concept of misinformation is definitely a slippery slope. The truth is, many ideas labeled as misinformation in the past have turned out to be valid. Whether it's the early discussions of the origin of COVID-19 or whistleblower revelations about government overreach, sometimes what's controversial today becomes the truth tomorrow. Free speech allows these truths to come to light. And that's why it's so essential to keep the conversations open. Now in segment 5 here, we're going to talk about the role of technology in free speech. Technology was supposed to, give free speech to everybody. But now it's being used to centralize and control those conversations. Major platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, go to the newspapers, CNN, MSNBC, all TV networks. They're working in coordination with government interests. And if they're not working directly with the government, they've got an agenda that matches up with a certain political party. They're increasingly censoring dissenting viewpoints under the guise of protecting the public. They're going to protect you by telling you what you should read, what you should think. But who gets to decide what's dangerous or misleading? That's why it's so important to decentralize alternatives and have direct community engagement. Now, we tend to think far left and far right. The news has far left-leaning things that they're trying to control. But let's face it, the far right has just the same danger over there, right? There's got to be open discussion. Imagine a future where tech giants with influence from political agendas control the narrative completely. We've already seen glimpses of it. We have selective enforcement of misinformation. We need a future where free speech isn't dictated by a handful of tech CEOs or bureaucrats, but where people control their own conversations. So what can you do to help preserve free speech and protect your independent thought? Not just your independent thought, everybody's independent thought. First, take responsibility for the information you consume. I told you, far left and far right, they have viewpoints. They're going to compete against each other. You need to understand what is information versus propaganda. Don't solely rely on the big platforms that might filter what you see. Seek out diverse viewpoints. Support independent content creators like myself, and make sure you're getting the full spectrum of everything. If you're going to read Fox News, maybe read the same thing on MSN. You're going to see the same story, but what's so funny is the viewpoints. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. And if you've been following my work at the Rogue Banshee, look, you know that my content faces heavily suppressed. It's very heavily suppressed. Platforms are making it harder for independent voices like mine to get the message out. You can help fight back by subscribing to the podcast or becoming a channel member on my YouTube channel. And most importantly, share the content. It's not going to cost you anything. No money is going to come out of your pocket by sharing content. Hey, check this podcast out. Hey, check this news article out. It doesn't cost you a penny. And every share helps break through the barriers that are being placed around free speech. If you control the search engine, you control what you can see. YouTube is a search engine. It's owned by Google. YouTube is a search engine. You go in there and you search for something, and they will decide what you can see and what you can't. Trust me, I see it in my analytics. I see when I get suppressed. Another way that you can help support me bring you more information is through my affiliate links. Head over to www.trb.fyi/partners, where you'll find partners who support what I'm doing here. When you click on these links before you shop, it supports me at no extra cost to you. And some of these partners even offer discounts, like MyMedic, 20% off. So you can save money while you're helping me bring you the content you're looking for. The power to preserve free speech starts with each of us. By taking these small actions, you're helping to keep independent voices alive and ensuring that platforms can't silence us all. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Undependent Podcast, where we believe true freedom comes from taking ownership of your life. Remember that free speech isn't a privilege. It's a right. It was written in our Constitution. And as long as we have the freedom to think independently, we'll always be able to challenge the forces trying to control us. Thanks for tuning in and empowering self-reliance one step at a time.